There is a voice in my head. It won't stop. It tells me to attack. Those were the first words of a young woman when interrogated by the police. Not a plea, not an excuse, not even a single tear, just a cold, detached statement echoing through the suffocating interrogation room. But what truly haunted everyone wasn't her words. It was what the police discovered at the crime scene. A lifeless body sprawled on the floor, eyes wide open in disbelief, as if still struggling to comprehend what had happened. Deep, relentless stab wounds covered the corpse, sending chills down the spines of even the most seasoned officers. A gruesome murder, and yet the killer remained there, unnervingly calm, as if the horror that had just unfolded was nothing more than a fleeting nightmare. Was this a moment of uncontrollable madness, or a meticulously planned crime? And who was the unfortunate victim? What connection did he have to the murderer? To uncover the truth behind this chilling case, let's dive into the mystery now. On the morning of July 23, 2016, the Allenville Police Department in New York received a welfare check request for Sarra Gilbert, a 52-year-old woman living alone in a quiet residential neighborhood. However, when officers knocked on her door, there was no response, and Mary seemed to be nowhere in sight. Assuming she had merely stepped out, the police decided to wait. But just then, the silence was shattered by a ringing phone. On the other end was Sherry, Mary's daughter, her voice filled with concern. She reported that her mother had been missing for hours, an unusually long time for someone as routine-driven as Mary. Sherry's words heightened the tension, forcing the officers to seriously consider the possibility that something was wrong. The police immediately began questioning neighbors, but they all said Mary had left a few hours earlier and had no known conflicts with anyone. Eventually, officers tracked down Sherry's address to gather more details. "Hello, are you the one who made the call?" "Yes, I'm Mary's daughter." "You haven't been able to reach your mother?" "No, I don't know what is going on. Sarah has mental health issues." According to Sherry, a woman named Sarah had called her, claiming she was hearing strange voices. Just minutes later, Mary had gone to Sarah's house, and from that moment on, she was unreachable. Upon hearing this, the police immediately headed to Sarah's residence to search for Mary. But when they arrived, the apartment was locked, and no one answered, turning their growing concern into outright fear. Just then, a strange man suddenly rushed to Sarah's home, looking distressed as he banged on the door. "Mary! Sarah!"
Do you have keys for the apartment?
No.
Who are you then? Exactly.
Nothing white.
Is your wife?
Yes.
Your wife and your daughter?
Yeah.
Okay.
That window is open. Is it open?
Yes, that.
What we do right now?
You think I could fit through there?
Wow.
No, it's not.
No, that's locked. Just got stoppers on it.
This raised the police's suspicions. Something had happened inside that apartment. The biggest question now was whether Sarah and Mary were safe. But what was even more shocking was the realization that this wasn't the first time officers had been called to this very address. Approximately 5 months earlier, on February 19, 2016, the police had received a distressing call from Sarra Gilbert herself. Her voice was filled with worry as she reported a disturbing incident involving her daughter, Sarra Gilbert. Earlier that day, one of Sarah's neighbors had called Mary to inform her that Sarah had been sitting in the garden, clutching a knife and staring intently at a dog. Officers were immediately dispatched to check on the situation, but by the time they arrived, Sarah was nowhere to be seen. They knocked forcefully on her door. "Sarah, open the door!" A few seconds later, the door cracked open just a fraction, revealing Sarah. Her face was pale, her eyes vacant. Her soaked hair dripped water onto the floor, forming small puddles at her feet. Her voice sounded normal, but something felt off. She stood motionless in the doorway, showing no sign of inviting anyone in. "We received a call from your mother. She's worried about you." Sarah blinked. "I'm fine." "Is there anyone else in the house?" She shook her head, saying no. "Are you sure?" Sarah suddenly fell silent for a few seconds before replying yes. The officers exchanged glances before stepping further into Sarah's apartment. The place seemed messier than usual. Then something caught their attention, a trail of wetness on the floor leading from the bathroom to the living room. The sight raised immediate suspicion. One officer asked if she had any pets. Sarah flinched slightly, then shrugged, answering with an unsettlingly blank expression. Just as she finished speaking, another officer noticed an unusual black plastic bag in the living room. When they opened it, the room fell into a heavy silence. Inside was the stiff, lifeless body of a puppy. Sarah had lied, but why? What was she trying to hide? The grim discovery hardened the officer's approach. What did you do to the dog? Faced with this direct question, Sarah did not resist or deny it. She simply blinked and admitted, I drowned it. Her reasoning? She claimed she had been hearing strange voices in her head, but that was nothing more than an unsubstantiated excuse. Without hesitation, the police gathered evidence, photographed the scene, and took Sarah into custody on charges of animal cruelty. Not long after, Manny, Sarah's longtime boyfriend and the father of their son, Hayden, was brought in for questioning. At first, he seemed anxious, his hands clasped tightly together, but when the police asked about the dog, his expression turned sorrowful. He admitted that he was the one who had bought the puppy for Hayden, a small gift meant to bring joy, but that happiness was short-lived. According to Manny, that morning, Hayden had noticed the puppy had peed in its crate. With innocent curiosity, he asked his mother if he could bathe it. No one could have predicted the horrific turn of events that would follow just minutes later. For reasons no one could understand, Sarah told Manny to take Hayden to the park. Once they left, she picked up a knife and stared at the puppy with a chilling intent. However, something made her hesitate. She abruptly dropped the knife, picked up the puppy, and carried it to the bathroom, filling the tub with hot water. She then forced the helpless creature under. But that was not the end. Realizing the puppy was still breathing, weakly struggling for life, she did not stop. Instead, she ensured its death by strangling it until it went completely still. When the police pressed Sarah for an explanation, she showed no remorse. Her response remained eerily unsettling. I had to do it. It was going to hurt me. This was not just a case of animal cruelty. It was a disturbing glimpse into Sarah's deteriorating mental state. Investigators dug into her records and discovered that this wasn't the first time she had exhibited erratic behavior. Just a month later, she had been forcibly taken to a psychiatric hospital after an incident at a pharmacy where she lost control and lashed out at staff over a delayed prescription. In hindsight, the signs had been there, warning bells that would have been heard. But no one could have predicted how quickly things would spiral out of control. After being taken into custody, Sarah was charged with aggravated animal cruelty and violations of mental health laws. A month later, she was sent to the Mid-Hudson Forensic Psychiatric Center for a 35-day psychological evaluation. By April, she was declared competent to stand trial and transferred to Ulster County Jail. However, no matter how much the world seemed to turn against her, Sarah still had one unwavering supporter, her mother, Mary, a devoted and loving parent. Mary firmly believed that her daughter was simply going through a difficult phase. Determined to help her, she paid $10,000 to bail Sarah out of jail on April 22, 2016. But had Mary's decision truly given Sarah a chance to regain stability, or had it unwittingly set her on a downward spiral, leading to an inevitable tragedy? As it turned out, just a few months later, in July 2016, the police weren't searching for Sarah because of a dog this time. This time, they were looking for Mary. Given everything that had happened before, they had an ominous feeling something terrible might have occurred. Upon arriving at Sarah's residence, officers found all the doors and windows barricaded. With growing concern, they forced entry with the help of Mary's husband, Elroy. The moment they stepped inside, a police officer's horrified scream shattered the silence. Oh my God, what the hell happened here? Elroy rushed in, only to collapse, his face draining of color, his body frozen in shock. Before him lay a gruesome sight: Mary's lifeless body, face down, covered in blood. The police couldn't help but shudder at the gruesome scene before them. Acting swiftly, they secured the crime scene and launched an immediate search for Sarah. Do you know that this time, the situation was far worse than anything they had encountered before? Had Sarah murdered her own mother? If so, what could have driven her to commit such a horrific act? Do not look away. Stay with us as we uncover the chilling twists of this case. In another room, Sarah stood pressed against the wall, her eyes vacant, a half-burnt cigarette still smoldering between her lips. When the officers finally pushed open the darkened door, she showed no signs of panic or fear. She simply shrugged and asked, in a strangely childlike tone, "Am I under arrest?" The officers ordered her to put out the cigarette, but she barely seemed to register their words. Instead, she muttered something incoherent before saying, "Can I have some water? My throat is so dry." It was as if, in her mind, thirst was far more important than the brutal crime she was being arrested for. Months later, she was handcuffed and escorted out of the house, where her family stood waiting. For a fleeting second, Sarra glanced at them, but instead of showing any remorse, regret, or fear, she simply whispered. At the police station, Sarra led into the interrogation room, a small dimly lit space with gray walls and a cold metal table. She sat down, arms crossed, her gaze unfocused. A police officer placed a cup of water in front of her, but instead of drinking, she just stared at it, lost, detached, as if it meant nothing to her. After a few minutes of silence, the interrogation officially began. "Do you know why you're here?" Sarra nodded slightly but said nothing. After a long pause, she finally murmured, "I heard voices. They told me to kill my mother." The officers had seen many suspects feign insanity to escape responsibility, but this time something about Sarra's demeanor unsettled them. One of the prosecutors leaned in. Who are you talking about?" Sarra lowered her hand, as if straining to listen to something inside her mind. Then, after a long pause, she whispered, "The voices in my head. They told me she was a demon. They told me she was evil." The officers pressed on, trying to separate fact from delusion. Sarra didn't resist. She did not try to justify her actions. Instead, she began revealing eerie details. She claimed the voices had been with her for a long time. They whispered, they sang. Sometimes they told her things she didn't want to hear. Realizing Sarra's mind was deeply fractured, an officer tested her awareness with a direct question. "Do you understand that your mother is dead?" Sarra blinked. Then, to their horror, she gave a weak smile and said, "She's not dead." A chilling silence filled the room. The prosecutors, unnerved, exchanged uncertain glances. They had expected denial, resistance, even rage, but not this. They continued pressing for details, trying to reconstruct the full picture, hoping to trigger her memory. But after hours of interrogation, they failed to obtain a clear confession, only fragmented thoughts from a mind consumed by chaos. Left with no other choice, they decided to pause the question. Just as they were about to leave the room, Sarra suddenly called out to them. Her expression had changed. Fear flickered in her eyes. She looked like she wanted to say something. She recounted that on the morning of Mary Gilbert's murder, she had sent a text to her sister, Sherry, telling her about the strange voices she had been hearing. Later, in a state of panic, she called her mother, Mary, as if crying out for help. Out of love for her daughter, Mary rushed to Sarra's apartment in Allenville, New York. She sat beside Sarra on the couch, comforting and reassuring her. But Mary had no idea that Sarra had hidden a kitchen knife beneath a pillow. Suddenly, Sarra pulled it out and stabbed her mother in the chest. Mary screamed in shock, fighting desperately to defend herself. But Sarra did not stop. She climbed on top of her mother, continuing with the violent assault with such force that the blade bent and eventually snapped. But the horror did not end there. Sarra grabbed the fire extinguisher and smashed it against Mary's head and face. Then, in a final brutal act, she sprayed the extinguisher's foam into her mother's mouth, ensuring she would never breathe again. Once she was certain Mary was dead, Sarra retreated to her room, lit a cigarette, and put on some music, as if nothing had happened. It was unimaginable. How could Sarra be so brutal to the mother who had loved her unconditionally? Her confession shocked and enraged prosecutors, but beneath their fury was also a deep sorrow for Mary, a mother who had given everything for her daughter, only to meet such a tragic fate. Determined to verify Sarra's claims, the police returned to her apartment, searching for the murder weapon. In a dimly lit corner of Sarra's room, they spotted it, an old metal storage trunk. It stood silently, its chipped paint and dust-covered surface making it look like if it had been abandoned for years. But something felt off. An officer approached, attempting to open it, only to realize it was locked. With no key in sight, they had no choice but to force it open. A sharp crack echoed through the room as the metal latch snapped. Slowly, the door creaked open, and what they saw inside left the entire team frozen in stunned silence. Inside the trunk, neatly placed on an old cloth, lay a long knife with a blood-stained rusted blade and a small aged fire extinguisher, both bearing clear signs of recent use. But what stood out the most were the faint but identifiable fingerprints on the knife handle and the surface of the extinguisher. A forensic team was immediately called in to collect evidence. Within hours, they confirmed the inevitable truth. The fingerprints were a perfect match to Sarra. This led to an even more troubling question. Why did Sarra hide these items? Psychotic killers driven by delusions often act impulsively, with no awareness of their actions, let alone an attempt to cover them up. But Sarra wasn't just a murderer. She had deliberately concealed the evidence. This suggested one thing. She knew exactly what she had done. Back in the interrogation room, the police continued to collect Sarra's testimony about the motive for the crime. Now she seemed more alert and began to talk about her life's memories, which she said was the source of everything. It's known that Sarra Gilbert is the third daughter of Mary Gilbert. Mary's childhood was full of hardship when she had to live with her drug-addicted father, but fortunately, she always had the warm arms of her mother to protect her. However, Sarra's life was not very peaceful when at the age of 14, she was abused by a man, leading to an unwanted child. She had no choice but to abandon the poor child and wanted to start her life over by studying hard. However, the path of knowledge was not for her. So at the age of 16, Sarra decided to drop out of high school and then moved in with her older boyfriend, Manny, and gave birth to a son named Hayden in 2009. It seemed that Sarra's choice would make her happier, but no, her relationship with Manny got worse with arguments, causing Sarra to become depressed and crazy. Sarra's family also helped care for Hayden whenever they could, including her eldest sister, Shannan. However, Sarra's depression reached its breaking point when tragedy struck in December 2011. Shannan was murdered in the infamous Long Island serial killings. At the time, Shannan had been working at a bar in Long Island, and at least 10 victims were found dead in the case. From that moment on, Sarra's mind spiraled into chaos. She began experiencing delusions, losing her grip on reality. One of her most bizarre episodes occurred in 2013. While watching the American Music Awards on television, she became convinced that she and Shannan had written songs for Rihanna, Beyonce, and Jay-Z. But Sarra's obsession with music did not stop at believing she was a forgotten genius. She also claimed that a mysterious figure, Eminem, was connected to everything. She insisted that his 2010 song, That's All She Wrote, mentioned someone named Sarra, which led her to believe that Eminem was secretly manipulating her life. As she recounted these beliefs, Sarra's thoughts became more erratic, as if she was desperately trying to piece together the puzzle in her mind. And then, between her fragmented sentences, a chilling detail emerged. She confessed to killing a puppy, but this wasn't just a senseless act of cruelty. It was something far more disturbing. In Sarra's eyes, the puppy was not just an ordinary animal. To her, it was the embodiment of Eminem, the figure she believed was watching her, controlling her, and trying to harm her. But her paranoia didn't stop there. Sarra was convinced that the people closest to her were also threats. To her, they were no different from Eminem, dangerous figures who could hurt her at any moment. And so, she longed for them to disappear from this world. Only then, she believed, could she finally live a complete and untroubled life. These revelations were more than just fragments of her confession. They were proof that Sarra was not acting unconsciously. She knew the gravity of her actions. She understood that if anyone discovered the truth, the consequences would be unavoidable. Sarra also admitted that her mother had put tremendous effort into helping her manage her mental illness, ensuring she took medication to silence the voices in her head. But as soon as Sarra stopped taking her prescribed meds, everything changed. At first, she felt fine. The absence of medication seemed like a victory. But what she didn't realize was that this decision would throw her into a far more dangerous spiral than ever before. Without the medication to suppress them, the hallucinations returned, stronger, more vivid, and more terrifying than before. She no longer just heard the voices, she saw things, twisted distortions of reality. Familiar faces became unrecognizable and sinister. She looked at her son, Hayden, and a terrifying thought crept into her mind. Was this really her child? Or was it something else, something pretending to be him? With no other way to cope, Sarra turned to drugs in a desperate attempt to regain control. She started with marijuana, hoping it would quiet the voices, but it wasn't enough, so she escalated. She tried ecstasy, hoping the hallucinations would fade, or at least become more bearable. But instead of relief, the darkness only deepened. But drugs only made her condition worse. Instead of silencing the voices, she twisted her reality even further, wrapping her delusions into something even more bizarre and terrifying. Her descent into madness reached its peak on February 19, 2016, the day she brutally took the life of her own mother. With full confession and the undeniable physical evidence gathered by investigators, every possible escape route for Sarra had been sealed. There was no room left for her delusions, no more excuses to shield her from the truth. The only thing awaiting her now was trial and judgment, and this time there was no mayor to stand by her side and protect her. Sarra Gilbert's trial began on an oppressively hot August morning in 2017. The courtroom was packed, not just with the grieving people of Ellenville, but with journalists, their cameras poised to capture every moment of a case that had shocked the nation. In the front row, Mary's family sat in silence. Their faces were hollow with grief, yet their eyes burnt with anger and sorrow. Then Sarra entered the courtroom, dressed in an orange prison jumpsuit. She moved with an eerie detachment, her vacant eyes scanning the room. But it wasn't her lack of expression that unsettled the crowd. It was her smile. A faint, almost unnerving grin played on her lips, sending a shiver through the courtroom. Was it the expression of a woman completely detached from reality, or was it something far more chilling, a sign of absolute indifference to the crime she had committed? The proceeding began with a fierce opening statement from Sarra's defense attorney, Martin Hayes. "Ladies and gentlemen of the court, my client, Sarra Gilbert, is not a cold-blooded murderer. She is a victim of severe mental illness, tormented by delusions beyond her control. The actions she took were not the result of a rational mind, but of a mind twisted and broken by psychosis. She did not commit this crime with clear intent. She was led astray by a world that only existed in her own mind." After his firm assertions, defense attorney Martin Hayes presented Sarra's extensive medical records, detailing her multiple psychiatric hospitalizations and her diagnosis of bipolar disorder and schizophrenia. He emphasized that at the time of the crime, Sarra was in severe state of psychosis, completely detached from reality and incapable of controlling her actions. If a person cannot distinguish between reality and delusion, can they truly be held fully responsible for their actions? Black prosecutor Matthew Connors remained unfazed. Stepping forward, he systematically laid out the damning evidence: crime scene photos, fingerprints on the murder weapons, and forensic reports, painting an undeniable picture of guilt. Then, he pointed to something even more chilling: Sarra's actions after the murder. She had deliberately hidden the murder weapons in a locked metal cabinet, sealing them away as if trying to bury the truth. A person who has completely lost control does not have the clarity of mind to carefully conceal the knife and fire extinguisher, the very tools used in the crime. His sharp, unyielding words resonated with the jury, many of whom nodded in agreement. After 3 days of intense deliberation, the jury delivered their verdict. Sarra Gilbert was found guilty of second-degree murder. Her sentence is 25 years to life in prison. Yet, as the judge announced her fate, Sarra remained eerily calm. She did not cry. She didn't beg. She simply smiled, a hollow, misplaced grin that sent a wave of unease through the courtroom. And then, without resistance, she was led away in handcuffs. As Sarra walked down the long hallway towards a life behind bars, the heavy courtroom doors slammed shut behind her, sealing away the freedom of a woman who once believed she was a forgotten musical genius. But as the prison walls closed in around her, a question remained. Could a prison sentence silence the voices in her mind? Or would they continue to haunt her, whispering, taunting, and controlling her through the long, endless years behind bars? As soon as the trial concluded, Sarra Gilbert's case became a media sensation, dominating headlines across major news outlets like the New York Times, CNN, and the Daily Mail. Shocking headlines flooded the internet. The Gilbert family tragedy, from terrifying hallucinations to a life sentence. The woman who believed rapper Eminem was a puppy and murdered her own mother. Insanity or evil. Videos dissecting every detail of the case surfaced across multiple platforms, with experts and analysts attempting to unravel the true cause behind Sarra's horrifying actions. Under news articles and YouTube videos, thousands of comments poured in, most of them mercilessly condemning Sarra. Mental illness is not an excuse for murder. She killed her own mother. She belongs in prison, not in a hospital. This case is straight out of a horror movie. Who the hell believes Eminem is a dog trying to kill them? Absolutely insane. However, a smaller group of people argued that Sarra deserved psychiatric care rather than a prison sentence. Our justice system is cruel. She is clearly severely mentally ill. She needs treatment, not life in prison. Sarra is just another victim of a broken system. If she had gotten help earlier, maybe this never would have happened. Yet, no matter which side people stood on, one undeniable truth remained. Justice had to be served. Sarra Gilbert's trial may have ended, but its impact would linger for years to come. This was no longer just a family tragedy. It forced society to confront deeper issues. The failures in mental health care, the lack of early intervention for psychiatric patients, the influence of music and media on vulnerable minds. But beyond the courtroom and headlines, the deepest wounds were left on those who had survived. No one suffered more than her son, Hayden, a child forced to grow up carrying the unimaginable burden of his mother's crime. This was not just the story of a woman who'd lost control. It was the story of a society that failed to save her in time. And if we do not learn from this tragedy, how many more Sarras will continue to wander, lost in the darkness of their own minds? Thank you for watching until the very end. Do not forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more true crime cases. See you in the next video.